Hello, and welcome to the Dissonance Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society.
So, Angel Eduardo, welcome to the Dissidents Podcast again. We're doing something a little bit different today. You and I are going to talk about faith. And for our audience, this is something that you and I have kind of gone back and forth on, saying, like, let's have this conversation. I want to have it. How do we start? I don't know. And I've been sitting with that. How do you start a conversation with faith on faith? And
Mm,
I have to say, this is probably my first. I'm a little sweaty right now, even. I mean, this is my first conversation, I would say, could be widely disseminated on faith, or the way I perceive faith.
mhm.
But the reason I came to you specifically is not just because we're friends, which I consider us a good friends, but it's because
Same.
also you're someone I admire. You're someone who I feel we share similar values, but we come from it from a different perspective, and I think we'll kind of get into that on the faith angle.
Mhm.
And also, I feel that with your emphasis on star manning, that we both come to this conversation not in a defensive crouch, not trying to convert one another, but out of like genuine curiosity
Mhm.
on the matter. And I've known, I think where you stand. Would you call yourself an atheist?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Okay.
Uh, Depending on how you define that. That's
Okay.
that's
Well,
part of what we need to get into, I think. But
okay.
yeah.
Well, then I will ask that question first off. But I will say,
Mhm.
I'll say that I've known that you are an atheist, despite the fact that your name is Angel, which I love that. But anyways, but it's when you open for Dawkins, and I've been doing a lot of reading C.S. Lewis, a lot of books that bring in Dawkins as point counterpoint, and that's where
Sure.
I really said, okay, hey, I would love to have this conversation. So
Mhm.
obviously, I need to talk to you about atheism, but like I said, I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and I think I know where I'd like to start
Mhm.
briefly, and then we can dig into that.
Sure.
A lot of times, it's funny on social media. I'm the executive director for the Institute for Liberal Values, and some people assume that I must be atheist or agnostic or non-religious. I mean, I've actually had texts that tag IL values or tag me, and I'm like, it's so interesting that liberalism to some people seems to be this like agnostic at least, if not atheist. But here's where I come to liberalism through my faith, and I am a Christian through my faith, and where I feel like
Mm.
liberalism, this is where I've become so committed to liberalism. So I've written down 5 things in my thoughts
Okay.
around it.
Okay.
So the first is individuality. So coming from a faith perspective, and a Christian faith perspective in particular, I believe that we are all made as individuals, and honoring that individuality in the other
Mhm.
person. So that, is my first overlap with liberalism and Christianity. And then the second one, and I think that I think the next four you'll probably really align with in your ideas around star manning, is love. And so for me, the prime directive outside of loving God is loving others. And that does not mean they do not have to be, bless
Excuse me.
you, bless you.
Excuse me.
They don't have to be, whether they're the same religion, whether they look different, no matter what. I mean, there's no boundaries on love. And so I come to liberalism in that way too. I feel that like that is a liberal value, is to treat your neighbor with love, kindness, respect.
Mhm.
The other thing that draws me to liberalism is this idea of judgment. So in my faith, I have been taught that I am not the judge. So I don't know the answers around the homosexuality, transgenderism, whatnot. And so I go back up to
Mm.
love. All I know is that I'm supposed to love the other, and it is not my place
Mhm.
to judge. And I think one of the problems with Christianity is the church itself. So
Mhm.
there's that. I mean, and we can talk about that in a little more depth too, because I consider myself a follower of Christ, and I'd
Right.
love to find a good church community. But I feel a lot of churches have gotten involved in judgment, and that has turned off a lot of people.
Mhm.
And then following on that, there's two other things that I think really align to your idea of not straw manning, star man,
Uh-huh.
grace and forgiveness.
Hmm.
And I feel like grace is something that is one of my top values that I have as just as a human. And to me, that means that when someone makes a mistake, or to recognize the humanity in that person, and also then that kind of sits on top of forgiveness. So those
Hmm.
five things: individuality, love, judgment, grace, forgiveness, is what makes me both a liberal, and it's how I approach that liberalism through the lens of Christianity. So
Hmm.
that's where that was kind of my big intro when I was thinking about, well, how do we start this conversation. So
Hmm.
I'll let you respond to some of that, and then we can get into some nitty gritty as it goes.
Well, you could probably guess I'm not going to disagree with any of those principles. Those are foundational to the good society, human flourishing. So I guess the real thing is that I I come at those conclusions, or I arrive at having those principles in a different way. Or it's that's not quite accurate, because the thing is that I used to be Christian. I mean, I used to be a believing Catholic. I used to go to church. I used to do all that stuff growing up. I went to Catholic school growing up. So it's not quite true that I'm arriving at it from a different place. I just don't see there are a few things that are sort of pretzeled together when it comes to this kind of thing. And you said, like, you arrive at these values through your Christian framework, right? But that's not the only framework from which you can arrive at these things. And so there's that, and we can set that aside. The fact that it is entirely possible, I'm sure you'll agree, for a non-Christian to arrive at all of those values and to hold them just as strongly.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then one of the other things that's twisted together with all this stuff that makes these conversations challenging sometimes is that then you have Christianity itself, just as one example, which brings with it a number of assumptions and claims about the nature of reality, the nature of humanity, the history of humanity, all these kinds of things that are, you have to basically buy into them in order to be considered a Christian legitimately. There are certain things that you have to agree with. And those things are truth claims about the world and the history of the world that require some kind of evidence for me to believe.
Mhm.
And that's where we get into the faith thing, right? But I guess I'll pause there first just to see if we're on the same page so far.
No, we're absolutely on the same page, and I want to hear some of those things that brought you away
Hmm.
from you know your Catholicism. But I
Hmm.
think first I want to backtrack. And you said, I asked if you were an atheist. I think we should define our terms here before we get
Yeah,
into the
yeah,
conversation. So,
yeah.
how would you define yourself on a faith scale, if there's such a thing?
Uh, so yeah, I mean, it's accurate to call me an atheist because the literal meaning of that word is that atheism, meaning I do not have a belief in a God. So I don't believe that there is a God. Now I'm also agnostic because agnostic is agnosis, meaning no knowledge.
Mm,
So I also don't know if there's a God.
mm,
So that's the thing, is people kind of put theism and atheism on two opposite poles, and agnosticism is kind of in between.
yeah.
They sort of set that dynamic up, but pedantically that's incorrect, because the two terms atheism and agnosticism are answers to two different questions. One is about what you believe and one is about what you know, right?
Mm,
So everyone on earth is agnostic with respect to whether or not there's a God, right?
mhm,
Some people might claim otherwise, but they probably are seeing things, it's very, very, we can basically say that no one on earth has seen God, literally.
mhm,
They certainly can't prove that they have. And so nobody knows.
right.
But that's a different question than do you believe? Do you believe is the faith thing. That's the
Mm,
I am choosing to behave as though such a thing is true, even if I cannot prove it.
mhm,
That's the faith thing. I'm choosing to behave in such a way as if a certain proposition is correct or true, even though I cannot validate it myself. So that's the faith thing. And then faith can kind of get tricky too as a term because we use it in different ways, right? Like I have faith in people. That's another way of using that term, but it's not the same meaning, right? I have faith in people, but I have a lot of evidence for why I have faith in people. So it's not the same thing. Like I generally have faith that I'm going to walk down the street and not get beat up or run over, or, you know, if I'm crossing the street, people are going to stop at the red light. I have faith that that's basically going to be the case 99% of the time, but I have reasons for believing that. So there's that, right? And then parsing the atheism agnosticism thing, we can get more into that, but that's how I use those terms. That's how I understand those terms. So when you ask me, am I an atheist? The answer is yes, literally speaking, but I don't tend to call myself that. And I don't tend to build an identity around that sort of thing because I think it's counterproductive and also confusing. A lot of people have different ideas of what atheism means. They think it's a positive assertion. They think that you're saying that there is no God. Like you're saying, you know, something. Or they say, you know, because you're an atheist, you have no principles. You think that there's no such thing as morality, etc. There's all these things that people smuggle in there that then you have to disentangle. So I tend not to use the term until I'm sure that we understand what we mean. But that's generally where I'm from.
And we never usually have conversations like this. I mean, usually with regards to religion, we won't call it faith. Religion, you know, it's either a you know, hot debate. You know, it's never, and I think that's one of the problems too with religion in general. There's the curiosity isn't there, and I think we've been. That's really sad. I think that we have been, at least in the Christian faith. I mean, their curiosity is kind of supposed to be baked in, and we've gotten away from that. We've become so sure of ourselves, you know. And again, that kind of goes back to problems with the church. But I think at least for today, because I hope that we maybe carry on this conversation. But I would love to maybe just get to like our journeys of where we are today and how we kind of came to these religious or faith principles. I don't know.
Yeah.
Principles is the right word. Lifestyle or belief.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing we should probably clarify is what is a religion, right? Because people will say stuff like, oh, you love music so much, that's your religion or something, you know, and I think that's an overextension of the term that renders it basically meaningless.
Right.
Even, you know, the thing of wokeness is a religion. I get what people mean, and certainly some of that behavior, and also the anti-woke, some of that behavior is very similar. There's the dogmatism, there's the, you know, the intolerance of dissent, there's all that kind of stuff, but it's not literally a religion. A religion is a specific thing that is defined a specific way, and if you start getting muddy with it, then it becomes difficult to talk about anything. So there's that. And so, you know, someone can have certain beliefs without a religion. And that's important to recognize as well, because you and I are going to agree on probably 99% of the fundamental principles of what makes people good, what makes behavior conducive to flourishing, what makes a good society. You and I are probably going to agree. But those principles are not exclusive to any religious structure or belief, and they can exist very well and do exist very easily outside of them. So that's another thing. So my journey, you want to you know,
I want
hear about
to
that?
hear your journey, but I just want to jump in and say, I mean, to reiterate what I said at the beginning, this is why I invited you specifically onto this, because I see so many parallels, and I'm so curious, because for me, where we got to, the places are, you know, we very, very different origins, and yet we're at the same place. And so this is where the curiosity, Anyways, so yes, your journey.
Well, so, you know, my parents are Dominican immigrants. My father actually has been an atheist for my entire life. But the curious thing is he never said anything. He never tried to influence that on my part or the part of my siblings or anything like that. He just, he'd go to church on Easter or whatever when my mom would drag him, but it's also baked into the culture too. Like all those rituals and those traditions they're built into the culture. So, baptism is just something you do, even if you don't believe in the stuff. Like you just do it because that's what you do. It's a thing. And Latin American culture, it's very steeped in all that stuff. So there's that. My mom is more of a believer, but in that kind of wishy-washy way where she'll go to church, but not every week. And she'll, she uses the language and she accepts certain things without really thinking or talking too much about it. But it doesn't affect her day-to-day life in that profound way, right? She's not a super, super devout person. But if you ask her, she'll say, yes, she does believe and etc. Like she buys into the certain things. And my siblings and I have prodded her and been like, come on, like a talking snake, really? Like we've done that. And, she'll laugh and she kind of, there's an in-between sort of reality that she's exists. Like she's not questioning it too much. She's not thinking about it too much. It doesn't affect her daily too much. But generally she would say, yes, I'm Catholic or I'm a Christian and, whatever. So we would go to church infrequently, but frequently enough to annoy me. I didn't enjoy it. It was like the longest hour of my life. And also ever since I was a kid, I've had this very acute sense of my time being precious, like my time running out and people wasting it. And so I was already resentful of school. Like you're taking, 6-7 hours of my day, 5 days a week already. And then you've got homework. That's already taking more time out of my day. And then now on Sunday, I have to deal with this thing. When am I going to get my free time? So I was already kind of programmed against this, but also there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. I asked too many questions. You could probably tell I'm that kind of kid. So I asked a lot of questions, didn't get very good answers. So there's that. But there's also the part of me that wants to make sure I'm being good and doing good. And that's an innate quality that I have as well. And so I've very much wanted to be pious. I very much wanted to follow all the rules and do all the right things and make sure I knew the things that I needed to know. And so I would struggle to pay attention because I thought, okay, well, the stakes couldn't possibly be higher, right? Like the consequences for not doing the right thing here are pretty huge. So I have to get this right. But every time I would try to do that, the more consistent I would try to be, the more inconsistent I would recognize everything around me being. So all that dissonance just led to confusion and questioning and more questions that didn't get good answers. And then I just realized that everyone's just kind of full of shit. Like I just like everyone around me is just kind of going along and like, but this is really important. Like, how do you guys not know this stuff? Like I'm 8. So I get it why I don't know it, but you guys are supposed to know it. Why don't you guys know this? So, generally that's kind of there was always a little bit of tension there between me wanting to be good and pious and everything, but then things not making sense and rules not working and people not being consistent and all that kind of stuff. And as I got older, you start consuming different kinds of media that poke and prod and ask kind of weird questions. You start seeing movies like Fight Club or something. And you start going, oh, okay. And so, to shorten this, I went through the phases of, you know what? Maybe it's just that you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, okay. Well, maybe it's just that you guys don't know what you're talking about. Oh, well, maybe it's just that this church is not good. Like you guys are just, bonkers or whatever. Or maybe it's just that the church is not good and you guys don't make any sense. But then I got to the point in late high school, early college where I'm like, okay, what do I have left? What's left after I've slowly phased out all these different things? And it's basically just like a kind of vague sense that there is a God. But how do I know that? Where do I get that vague sense from? Is it just because people have been telling me that since I was a little kid? I don't know. So I started examining the premise and I realized I have no reason to hold the premise except that I have an emotional reason for it's only an emotional reason. It's just because I feel the need for there to be this thing. And that wasn't good enough for me logically, but it also stopped being good enough for me emotionally when I started looking around and realizing, I mean, if there was a creator of the universe and it was this omnipotent, all-powerful being, But me, some random kid who's just, this little shithead, can think of like a zillion ways that they could do a better job given their status and power. I'm looking around and I'm going, this makes no sense. Like I had a death in my family that shocked me profoundly. Nobody was expecting it. It was really terrible and sad. This
This your
this guy
uncle?
left behind. Yeah, my uncle. Yeah, he died randomly in an accident at his job, and he was the youngest of my mother's siblings. And so everyone was looking at my grandparents and just going, any day now. But what ended up happening is the youngest sibling died randomly, and he left. He turned 30 the day before, and he had gotten married the August before, and his wife was pregnant. So here's a guy now who will never meet his daughter. Here's a daughter who will never meet her father. Here's this freak accident. So I'm just looking at that and I'm like, what possible being could justify this? And then just think about, babies who are born dying of some horrible illness and they live for like 20 minutes and then they just die. So they were born to suffer for 20 minutes and they're gone. Like all these kinds of things. I just realized this does not belong, to quote George Carlin, on the resume of a supreme being. So I obviously don't know the nature of this thing, right? And so I just resolved myself to saying, okay, nobody knows what they're talking about. Everyone is thinking wishfully. And if there is some kind of higher being, I know nothing about it. I know nothing about its nature. And there's no reason for me to operate on the assumption that they exist and that it matters whether I know they exist or not. And so that was the end of it. It's just kind of, the rest of it just dissipated. And then it just became about dealing with my fellow humans and the things that they believe and why they believe them and how important it is for us not to believe things on insufficient evidence, because that leads to behavior that could be harmful, etc. Then you get into what's the foundation for morality and all that kind of stuff. But I've been yapping, so I'll leave it there.
Well, I'm taking notes. I hope that I think we're biting off, there's so much to chew here. We're biting off a
Yeah.
lot. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm taking notes because there's so many threads I want to pick up there. And I think,
Sure.
though, for our audience, maybe just today to do our journeys, and then we can pick up on some of these finer threads
Mm-hmm.
later. But I thought, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey,
Yeah.
um, and we can go from there. But I grew up. My family was religious. I just, I was born into Christianity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of times I've asked myself throughout my life, like, what if you were born into as a Muslim? What if you were born as, a Hindu? Like, would you have the
Mm-hmm.
same convictions that you do towards your faith? So that is something I struggle with often, and I'm asked myself often. But I
Mm-hmm.
would say, because of those questions, and when I was very young, not very young, when I was, K through 12, my father was in the Air Force and we moved overseas. So we moved to a place, this was back in the 80s, when Burma was called Burma and it was ruled by a military junta. Now I think it's pretty much still ruled by a military junta, but it was very dire at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I just fell in love with not the junta, but with what I was learning with the people there. Burma is very, very eclectic in the sense that it is mostly Hindu, mostly Buddhist. It's a Buddhist country, but like there is a large minority of Hinduism. There Hindus. There's a large Christian minority, and so I would go, as a kid, and go to these Hindu ceremonies where they were literally walking on fire, like no joke, walking on fire. I can even add pictures to this podcast, and literally suspending themselves by their flesh from hooks in their back, as signs
Mm-hmm.
of devotion. And I just
Mm-hmm.
became absolutely fascinated with different cultures, different religions, all of it, which is why I went into international relations. And one of the things, then going back to high school, I was maintained my membership in the church. I did the youth group, all that stuff. And again, I still believed, but my eyes had been open. I mean, they just had been open. And where I really came down, the answer that I could never answer was, if you don't believe that Christ died on the cross, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to hell. So even if you're the best person in the world,
Right.
you believe in Allah, you believe in Krishna, whatever, you're going
Right.
to hell.
Right.
And all the people that I've lived with and that, I've spent time with, that are as good or better than, the best Christian I've known, I'm like, no, no, that's where you lost me.
Right.
That's where you lost me. And I
Right.
would say from college on to probably the past couple years, I would say that I was agnostic. I would use the word agnostic, and I would use it liberally, without
Mm-hmm.
the same
Mm-hmm.
definition that you. To me, agnostic meant that I believed in a God. I just didn't know where that God, originated from. So that's how
Mm-hmm.
I use the term agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say agnostic probably up until about a couple. I would still go to church. I church hopped. I mean, I went to the Quakers one time. That is awesome, by the way. They just sit there. They just sit, and you
Mm.
just like kind of like meditate on God. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember. So I for some reason after a certain family traumas, divorce, etc., I
Sure.
found comfort in the church. And so I wanted my son and I to find a church. And I remember church hopping. And at this point, he's very young himself. And I was lazy and I wanted a church in my neighborhood. And the Baptist church was in my neighborhood. And
Mm.
to me, when we talk about Christianity, I mean, again, this is me, Jennifer, I'm not a theologist, but it's like, as long as you love Jesus, I don't care if you're Baptist,
Right.
Protestant, whatever. I mean, to me, it's like that's the foundation, right? So
Right.
not thinking, again, not thinking critically. So I
Mm-hmm.
go to this Baptist church and they start preaching the whole like hell and brimstone. My son came home from Sunday school
Yeah.
crying,
Yeah.
crying
Yeah.
because he was going to go to hell. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Now, so we went to the Presbyterian churches where I spent most of my youth. So, we found the Presbyterian church, no, not the same hell and brimstone. So I've got to interject a funny story. One of the times when we're going to this church, which did not last long because of the reasons I just mentioned.
Sure.
Finn and I, my son, we were walking back from church and I said, can you say the Lord's Prayer? And he said, our Father who wrought in heaven. What did you just say? And he goes, yeah, like, why is he rotting in heaven? I was like, first of all, okay, you just got that wrong. And God is not a zombie. Our Jesus is not a zombie. So anyways, so there was that.
That's
So
funny.
I found a church where, again, and we can talk in different episodes on the ideas of hell. I've got some very, ideas I don't think that a lot of Christians or a lot of churches would
Mm-hmm.
probably agree with. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't, to me, again, going back to the 5 principles that make me a liberal and a Christian, love is number one. And so when
Mm-hmm.
you catapult hell and damnation ahead of love, when Jesus said, love
Mm-hmm.
God and then love your neighbor, those are the two things that you need to remember of anything that
Mm-hmm.
I've done here on earth. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't buy into that.
Right.
So went to a different church and, it's gone fine. I was involved. I became a deacon. But I would say, honestly, my experience is different than yours because it wasn't really until my dad died and then my sister died. And both of these stories. And my sister, like your uncle, died my dad died of cancer, which was horrible
Mm-hmm.
and gruesome and fought for 5 years. And I have a lot of questions for God, when the time comes.
Yeah.
But we die. We die. We get old and
Yeah.
we die.
Yeah.
My sister, that was not the case. And
Mm-hmm.
when we found out that we lost her, and really quickly, I don't want to use this time to get into it, but she was hiking in the snow and the river was frozen over, but her dog found a little crack and fell into the crack, and she went in after him and didn't resurface.
Oh.
Um, they found her. I don't know if I updated you, Angel. They found her 3 months later holding the dog.
Oh my God.
So
Oh, I'm so
anyways,
sorry.
yeah, thank well, okay,
Oh.
this is I'm rambling. I'm not. I'm going on too. So let me get to my
No,
point
it's
here.
okay. It's okay.
Um, I mean, I remember when we were sitting there waiting. We were in Alaska, with, a mile from where this tragedy happened. My mom and I and my son. Actually, my son took one of the cars with her sons to go out onto the river. So they were there with the EMS and the police and whatnot. And my mom, there's no cars, not to mention, I don't know how to drive on the snow. So there's, but my mom and I were pretty much just isolated at home, waiting, just hoping that they found her upstream somewhere or something. And I'll never forget when someone came in and said, they've called off the search, right? And I just said, fuck you,
Mm.
fuck you. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not big on cussing, but that was what I said to God at that time,
Yeah. Yeah.
and how could you, and not only that, I mean, we'd lost my dad. We were there with the purpose of spending Christmas up there with my sister was it was going to be our first Christmas without my dad, right? Anyways, so it was about a month of just anger and hatred. And there was this nagging voice in the back of my head that just said, just lean
Mm.
into me. And I'm like, I don't want to, like I would sometimes give like the bird to the sky, I mean, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, I know I don't want to. You did, you could have avoided this. You no.
Yeah.
For reasons that I cannot really explain, I stopped fighting the urge to lean in and I leaned in.
Hmm.
And all I can tell you is the grace and the love and the comfort that I felt was not human.
Mm.
It was not, I was not getting that grace and that comfort and that love from other people, my family included. I mean, it's just, we all suffer grief
Sure.
in different ways.
Yeah.
And that's really my testimony. I have not, from there, I will finish up by saying from there, I leaned in further. I leaned into the Bible. I leaned into reading more. I mean, again, I've read my Bible here and there, but I leaned into making it a habit. I leaned into prayer. I leaned into meditation.
Hmm.
And I feel like that hole in my heart, well, it will never, it's always going to be there. But that hole in my heart has been filled in some
Hmm.
capacity that couldn't be filled by, I mean, I was drinking way too much. That was
Yeah.
one of my ways to deal with the pain, you
Yeah.
know, um, finding all kinds of ways to numb out. And it wasn't until I really leaned in that I just felt that space, the grief was still there, the sadness was still there, but I was being strengthened around that. I always call grief like a stone. Like the weight never changes, but as you carry it, your muscles build around it.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have found that without leaning in. And really that's where I'm at. And that's why I've become so, I mean, I do not believe in people evangelizing or proselytizing or pushing their faith or their religion on anyone else. I think that that's gross. I feel like your life should be your sermon, whether you're religious or not.
Yeah.
Um, but I've become so curious because of what I felt that to me is undeniable.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm staying on the path, at the moment.
Hmm.
So I I have thoughts and ideas, and I think we should save this for another on suffering. I just
Uh-huh.
finished reading a great book by Tim Keller. Tim Keller is one of my favorite Christian authors. He's much more accessible, Angel, than C.S. Lewis, who I mentioned to you in passing, who I love too. But
Hmm.
um, because I've struggled with this. I mean, I struggled with why do you take the good ones first?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Like, I like what you said. It wasn't your quote, but this is not a resume of a supreme being.
Yeah.
George Carlin, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've got ideas. I mean, as I've leaned in, as I dug in, as I faced my sorrow, face on instead of like through a wine glass.
Yeah.
Um, I have I don't know if they're answers. I still have I have a gazillion questions, but I have enough trust and enough comfort that I feel that the answers that I do have, as maybe unsubstantial as they are enough at the moment.
Hmm.
Okay, gosh, that was a lot. I just like totally, whew,
Oh, so, I mean, I did the same thing. But oh,
twice.
it's just, yeah. So here's the thing. And obviously I went through similar grief and unfortunately more than one time, that the story of my uncle's, that's the first death that was really close and that shocked me in that way, and that I had to suffer through grief in that way. And I felt the same feelings as you. You know, I remember talking to my cousin and saying, like, I'm angry at God. Why would he do this? You know, so I had already abandoned religion in the organized religion kind of way, and I already had a ton of questions about, you know, the Bible and, you know, the historicity of all that kind of stuff. But I still was holding on to that last vestige of, like, you know, there's this creator being, there's this father in the sky, right? But then what father would treat his children like this? And I couldn't help but have that feeling. And, you know, I don't drink, and I never have, so I didn't have that recourse. And, you know, I just came to the realization that, you know, I don't know what's going on. If there's anything going on, I can't pretend to know, and it won't comfort me to pretend to know things that I don't know. It's like, and I guess that there's a temperamental thing to this, because there are some people who can set their alarm clocks 10 minutes ahead, and that will work. Like, they'll look at the clock and go, oh my God, I'm late. And they'll actually be early because they thought they were late. Like, there are people for whom that works. I don't understand it, because I look at that and I'm like, yeah, but I set that 10 minutes ahead, so I have 10 minutes more than I think I do. And I'll know that instantly because I remember doing it. So it's never going to work for me. So there might be a temperamental thing. But the thing is that, like, also all the things that you felt, right? That voice in your head saying lean in, and the profound feelings that you felt once you actually submitted to that, right? I don't doubt that you felt those things. I don't doubt that that voice was there. I'm certain that it was. And I'm certain that you are absolutely correct in how deeply comforting and fulfilling that was. The only thing I would say is that we don't know. I would dispute any conclusion about those feelings and about that voice that puts it outside of the realm of, like, physical space, right? We have to just put a question mark there. We have to just say, I have no idea, right? So where did this come from? Was it just a voice in the back of my head? Was it me telling myself? Or was it something else? I don't know if it was something else. And we have to kind of just go through all the more likely possibilities first. As a scientist, you have to behave this way. And, you know, you have to go through every more plausible explanation before you start getting to the weird ones. And the more plausible explanation is that it was something deep inside of you telling yourself, this is what you need to do. So I'll give a quick story that will help disentangle this stuff. And by the way, I have all the time in the world, so I can talk to you forever. So don't worry about time limitations on my part. But, you know, I'm a huge Superman fan. And particularly Christopher Reeve's portrayal of Superman. That's the one that I grew up with. So there was a time when I was a kid, I was maybe 10 or 11 or something like that. And it was the summertime, and my parents took us to Toys R Us. And there was a toy that I really wanted, but I wasn't going to get it. Like, there's a longer story about, you know, my brother breaking things and me trying to kind of work that into my calculus. But the short version of it is, there was a toy that I wanted and I wasn't going to get it. And so I had two options. And I've told this story before a couple of times, but it's instructive here. So I have two options. The first option is give it up. Just, you know, you're not going to get it. Whatever. You know, tough luck. Or I can tear open the packaging and shove it in my pocket and nobody will know. So I chose the second option, right? And, you know, I'm old enough to know I shouldn't do that, right? But I did it anyway because I really, really wanted this toy. And that urge superseded my knowledge that this was wrong. I can taste the summer air outside the double doors. We're that close. My parents are paying at the checkout line. We're almost there. But as I get to the exit, I just immediately, in the back of my mind, flashes an image of Christopher Reeve as Superman in the sky. And he's got this look of disappointment on his face. And it just broke my heart. I couldn't do it. It broke my heart. It shattered me. That guy, his face, just looking and just going, You know, it just that hit me so hard that I almost started crying. And I said I couldn't do it. And I ran back to the shelf and I took the toy out of my pocket and I put it back on the shelf. And then I ran back to meet my parents out in the parking lot. Like, I didn't say anything to anybody. No, you know, I didn't have a conversation about this. It's just something that happened instantly. And it had a concrete effect on my behavior in that moment, right? There was something I didn't do that would have been wrong if not for this image that popped into my head. So here's the thing. Superman's not real, right? We know this. It was made up by two dudes in the 1930s in Cleveland, right? He's a comic book character. And no one has been telling me, oh, you know, Superman will be really mad if you don't do this. Like, no one, there's no religion around it. There's no system of morals based around it that anyone's trying to inculcate, right? There's nothing. There is simply my love for this character embodied by this actor and my own knowledge that the thing I was doing was wrong. So what was going on there? The most likely thing is not that, you know, a supreme being shot that image into my mind at that moment to stop me from doing what I was doing. It's more likely that I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I used my personal mirror for goodness to remind myself in that moment that I shouldn't do what I'm doing. And the reason why I think this is instructive is because of all those things that I mentioned. You know, like, there's no question about Superman's being real. There's no history. Nobody's ever died about, you know, fighting about this stuff. It's a comic book character. But what he is an avatar for our morality, our moral code. He's a way for us to reflect ourselves back to ourselves and one another, and the best qualities of ourselves, our aspirational selves. He's a mirror for our aspirations, our moral aspirations. He's the pillar of goodness. I knew that at 10 years old, even if I couldn't articulate it in that kind of intellectual way, right? And it had that effect. So I was doing it for myself subconsciously because I already knew what I was doing was wrong. My heart was racing. I knew I was breaking a rule. And I felt bad about it. And the way that I told myself, finally, you shouldn't do this, don't do this, in a way that worked, was to use this symbol that meant everything to me. So I feel like something similar is happening when we grieve in that kind of way. And we have this voice in our head telling us, submit, you know, lean into this, let go and just feel the feelings, go through the process, and you will feel better. You will find community and communion. You will find all these beautiful things. I think that's us communicating to ourselves in a way that is difficult in a moment that's difficult, so that we can get through it. And, you know, when I was going through that same grief, that's what ended up happening, as I realized, okay, well, all these people around me, they also miss and love this person. They also are feeling these feelings. We're all trying to find our way to dealing with this sad reality. This baby girl is going to be born. She's never going to know him, but we can make sure that she has a piece of him somehow. And we can, you know, so I just realized there's nothing we can do about the inevitabilities of life. And grief is a part of that. And it's not wrong to feel it. It's something that must be felt. And so once I realized that, it just became this thing of, okay, this is the grieving process. This is the part where I'm going to feel all these things, because I'm never going to see this person again, as far as I know. And all these feelings are normal and natural. All these feelings are inevitable, because this is what happens when you love people. And I would never trade all the love I felt and all those moments I have with my uncle for getting rid of this feeling of grief. So because I cannot control the things that happen in the world, all I can do is respond to them, react to them how I react to them. And if this is one of those ways that is necessary, then that's just what has to be. So I ended up just kind of realizing, you know, these are the difficult aspects of a beautiful existence, and that consciousness is its own reward anyway. And that even though I feel the worst I've ever felt in my entire life in this moment, I wouldn't trade it for not being here. You know? So I guess it's just once we get to the point where you have these profound feelings, which are definitely there, and I would never dispute, once we jump from that to, and therefore, these certain specific claims about how the universe works or how our world works are true, well, then I have questions. And then we're going to start getting into like evidence and all these kinds of things, right? But as long as it's just, I have this profound feeling and I don't know what it is, I can't explain it. I've had those too, and they are what they are.
So I picked up a couple of threads I want to kind of weave around. You've been laughing about temperament because you mentioned about how the clock and people putting
Mhm.
it 10 minutes early. I think you and I have a different temperament in that regard because I was the person who would say, if I had a paper due, I'd make it the due date a week earlier, get it done by that. And I still knew that was the due
Really?
date, but then I could relax. So I still like test out, up until when my due date was. But for
Mhm.
whatever reason, the relaxation of knowing it was done between my due date and the real due date was like glorious. I don't know. That's my weirdo temperament. So there's
I
that.
that sounds like it would be really great. I just can't do it. It just makes no sense. I'm like, yeah, but I know I actually have an extra week, so I'm fine. And
Yeah,
I
just
do procrastinate.
the relief of knowing like if something came up, I had cushion. It was like that cushion that I don't know.
Right, right, right.
So
Yeah, yeah. So
then going to
funny.
Superman. So I'm really interested. I was listening to something or reading something the other day that someone was talking about J.R.
Hmm.
Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, both of whom are Christian,
Hmm.
and both of whom have written mythical stories. C.S. Lewis with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. J.R.
Hmm.
Tolkien with the Hobbit series and the Lord of the Rings. And one of the things apparently, and this really spoke to me, and while you were talking about Superman, this is the train of thought that I was going through is J.R.R. Tolkien was talking to C.S. Lewis. And again, I just heard this the other day. I heard this, from something else that I was reading.
Hmm.
And J.R. and C.S. Lewis was pushing back on religion, saying, he really believed in like, Norse mythology and all these different mythologies that kind of touched on, godlike characteristics, right? Either rebirth, redemption, strength,
Hmm.
all these things that were similar in Christianity, but he could believe them for some reason if it was coming from these North mythologies. But when it was coming from a Christian story or Christian perspective, he was like, nah, nah. So apparently they kind of kept having these discussions. Lo and
Hmm.
behold, yeah, we know the story. C.S. Lewis became a Christian, but he ended up using that myth and that mythology and that storytelling to write his books. And as you know, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I mean, Aslan is
Yeah.
the king. Aslan is God, and so
Hmm.
I found that really fascinating because I think a lot of times we tell stories, Superman stories, Norse mythology that touches
Hmm.
on these things that we want to be out there. But when we look at something like the Bible that says, "Oh well, hey, it actually it may be out there." There's a question of faith again, which is where I'm going.
Hmm.
But it's like we'll be like, nah. But we're, yes, you said, okay, Superman doesn't really exist. Okay, we got that. But there are
Yeah.
people who do believe in some of the mythologies of the Norse mythologies and whatnot. And
Yeah.
J.R.R. Tolkien was saying these are all like kind of this is the way in his mind that humankind was getting to the place where they could accept God. It was like touches of God. They just didn't have the whole picture yet. And I thought
Hmm.
that was interesting. But that
Hmm.
that brings me to what I think will be my last point because some of the other stuff I want to get into it in a little more detail. And
Yeah.
I
Oh,
don't want to
I love that this is going to be a series. This is great.
Are you okay with that?
100% okay with that.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I've already got like ideas for
No, I'm
questions
thrilled
I want
about it. I can't wait. Yeah.
but the thing is, what you were saying about Superman and what I was just saying about like Norse gods and whatnot is at
Hmm.
some point what is true about Christianity or any other religion, formal
Hmm.
religion, is there
Hmm.
is an element of faith. So I mean, there is something that you cannot see, touch, taste, hear, smell, whatever.
Hmm.
And so I was thinking when you were talking about Superman, and you said, well, it's not like God put that idea in my head. It was because I love Superman and I generated that myself. And I
Hmm.
think that that's probably the most likely answer. But
Right.
I don't know, as someone coming speaking from faith, who's to say that God did not go, Superman is his guy. And this is how
Sure.
I speak to Angel is through
Right.
Superman, right? In the way
Yeah.
that the Norse, people are, talked about the
Okay.
Vikings talked about Norse
Gotcha.
mythology, like maybe that's
Gotcha.
maybe how they were interpreting
So
God.
okay, so God is saying this is the easiest route through which I can influence this particular group of people because they have these beliefs. So I will funnel my guidance through those beliefs. Is that what you're saying?
I'm proposing that as a possibility. I don't know
Yeah.
that that's a fact, but
Sure,
again,
sure.
to me, this idea of faith is, I mean, this taking this leap of faith is truly
Mhm.
taking a leap into the unknown, and
Mhm.
and we take leaps into the unknown all the time. It's for whatever reason when it comes to religion, we back off, like that's the leap that we won't take, but we'll
Mhm.
take leaps
Mhm.
into other things with no
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
Um, anyways, I
Right.
don't know. I'm pretty sure it was probably your mind because and I know how much you love Superman, but you
Yeah,
can't.
it's
It is
no,
there's
right.
a
But
possibility.
sure, I suppose that's a hypothesis someone can forward, right? They can
Right.
say, well, no, it actually was God who planted that idea in your head, and he used Superman because it was the easiest thing. It was right there. He knew it would work. Okay, that's a hypothesis, but the thing is that so many other claims are smuggled into that hypothesis before you can even get to the point of, let's just say there was some way of proving that it was God who did it and it wasn't just me conjuring that image subconsciously for myself. Before you can get there, you have to establish the fact that there is a God and that this God intercedes on our behalf in that sort of way and for whatever reasons. Like there are just claims about the universe that are now being put on the table that need to get worked out first, right? Whereas the idea that it's almost certainly just the fact that I've loved this character and that there was a recognition, a human recognition of him being a symbol of goodness, and that I used that subconsciously for myself. Because again, it's not like I had no idea that what I was doing was wrong. I knew very well I shouldn't do that, right? And I was doing it anyway because my selfishness was getting the better of me. But that was my internal grappling, right? So that's the problem with those kinds of claims is, you can't say it wasn't God. No, I can't, but that's not how um that's not how these claims work, right? Like the
Yeah.
burden of proof is on whoever is choosing to put forth this theory, right? So if
Yeah.
or hypothesis. So if the hypothesis is it was God, okay, so now you have to prove that there is a God and that then you have to prove that God did this specific thing, which your work is cut out for you there because that's going to be tough, right? And so again, my default is always to say I have no idea. I really don't know. If you ask me, do you think it was God who planted that idea? I'd say I don't know. I have no reason to think so,
Right.
and that's as far as I can get with it, right? Um, Now, to getting to the thing you were talking about with Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, I think that Tolkien is right in the sense that these stories resonate with us and these archetypes resonate with us, right? There's death and rebirth, there's fighting the dragon, right? There's all these archetypal things that resonate with us. And that is our way, our stories, our myths, our legends are ways of communicating that with each other and tapping into it and kind of wrestling with those feelings and ideas, right? And comic books are part of that. Comic books are our modern mythology. Superman is Hercules. Like it's all that same thing that we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years. And that's the thing that I think Tolkien, to the extent that I'm aware of those kinds of conversations that he had, and other people as well, the thing that people miss when they start talking that way is that they just kind of presuppose that Christianity is the end point, right? Like everything that came before. So someone would say, for example, oh yeah, all your Superman stuff is great, but the reason it resonates with you is because it's fundamentally a Christian story. It's fundamentally, he's an allegory for Jesus. Not quite true. He's actually more Moses than Jesus, but people can, he's a savior figure, et cetera, et cetera. The morality is Christian morality, et cetera, et cetera. And I get why they're drawing those things because there's a sense in which that's true. But they're stopping at Christianity arbitrarily because human morality predates Christianity by millennia. We've had moral teachers and moral teachings and philosophy and ethics for all of human history and before, right? Morality is almost like an evolutionary emanation of our species. We create morality because we're wired fundamentally a certain way. I just got the book Blueprint by Nicholas Christakis, which is about the evolutionary origins of the good society. It's basically about the idea that we can't help but cooperate and communicate and develop pro-social moral values because it benefits us. We are wired this way, right? 100% of people, well, almost 100% of people, right? Barring obvious exceptions, if you put your hand on a hot stove, you will instinctively and reflexively pull it away. And the feeling that you get from having done that, we're going to categorize as bad. We're going to be like, that was not a good feeling. We don't want that. That's a bad feeling. That is the foundation of all our moral everything, right? Because if morality is basically a strategy for flourishing, and we have many different ones, and some of them are mutually exclusive. They're not compatible, but that's all it is if you really boil it down. And our religions are sort of systematized versions of that. Our religions are they're like the first superstore. They're like the first Walmart, right? Like you can get your groceries, you can get your clothes, you can get your toys, you can get your hygiene products all in the same place. Religion's kind of like that. You get your history, you get your science, you get your morality, you get your ritual and culture all under this one umbrella. It's our first attempt to do that kind of thing. But now we have better versions of a lot of those things. There are specialty stores that are just going to be better than Walmart at those specific things, and we should be mindful of that. But also, so the final thing is just Christianity is not the end point. But a lot of people go, oh, this is a Christian society, we are a Christian culture, et cetera, and it's only because they're choosing to plant the flag there and not look any further. And the reality is that our morality comes from us. We infuse our religions with morality, and it's not the other way around. People put the cart before the horse with that sort of thing, in my view, and in my research and reading and understanding of how these things work, which is why we have all these different religions, which is why we have all these different societies. But deeply ingrained in all of those things is just this human desire to flourish. If you break it down, that's really what it is. And we just find all these different ways. And now in the West, we're obsessed with Christianity. We're obsessed with Christianity being the foundation of the West. I personally think it's hard to hear that argument over the screams of burning heretics, but I get where people are coming from. I just think that it's an arbitrary stopping point. If we keep going, we'll find Confucius. We'll find all these other incredible people who predate Christian morality and Jesus himself. And it's all on a continuum. So Tolkien is right, but it's incomplete, in my view.
So what I think I'm going to do is, before we meet the next time, I'm going to read Blueprint. I love the idea.
It's a chunky book.
Okay, well, I might have to get the notes on it. I figure we probably, given that we're getting into the holiday season, we probably will, plan to meet again, either later in December or in January. So I have some time.
Sure.
Because I like the idea of what is a strategy for flourishing. That's really interesting, and I want to be able to kind of think on that. And then the other things, I want to unpack a little bit. And you mentioned, the screams of the burning heretics. Yes, sorry. I want to talk about, church and just kind of as an institution. And I want to talk about morality. I want to talk about some of the universal claims, like you mentioned, that make Christianity and or religion hard to swallow. And then I would love to also talk about the, kind of pick up on the suffering part a little bit too. So if you are down for that, I think we've got like 4 more.
This is great. No, I love it. This is great. Yeah. Sorry. I mean, these topics are so dense and there's so much to parse that an hour is never going to be enough.
Yeah.
But also I'm prone to rambling because I'm trying to cover all these I'm trying to whack all these moles that pop up,
Right.
you know. So
Well, and that's why I kind of want to do it in segments where it's like we can take the time, or I can take the time to digest your point of view and
mm,
come back, even though the topic might be different. I mean, the topic will be the same, even though if we're taking a different chunk of it. So,
mhm.
yeah,
No, and I love examining this stuff and hearing where you're coming from. If I sound like a jerk, tell me. Um, but you know, I've thought about this for like 25 years.
yeah,
Just so I have a very well developed conception of my perspective on it, and so that it, you know, and I still get a little bit excited when someone goes, I have definitive proof that there's a God, and I go, oh, I still get a little bit excited, like, oh, okay, let me see it, let's see it. Unfortunately, it's always the same stuff I've heard 1,000 times, but I that to me is an indication that the conversation's not over and that I very much am engaged and interested in hearing something I've never heard before, considering something I haven't yet.
yeah, me too.
Um, because that's all I care about is figuring out the best way to be here.
I think that's kind of the meaning to life, anyways. Whether
Right.
you're coming from it from a religious perspective or not, is kind of figuring out our purpose here.
Mm, indeed.
So, all right, Angel. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for being on this journey with me.
Oh, thank you. I can't wait for the next one.
Me too, me too. I will get through. We'll get through Thanksgiving, and then I'll
Sure.
touch bases with you in December, and we'll see what we can plan.
Sure. That sounds great.
Okay. All
All
right.
right.
Have a good
Take
rest of
care.
your week and your weekend.
You too. Take care.
All right. Bye,
Bye.
Angel.